Jordan in Utah, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Jordan.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for taking my call. So I had a question for you again about systemic racism. So I'd had this experience as a missionary in Connecticut on the drive between West Hartford to Hartford, where everyone went from, it's actually Hartford to West Hartford, where everyone went from usually poor, not white, and then 2 blocks later, like mini mansions everywhere, everyone's white. And I feel like left has done a really good job in kind of taking this kind of general feeling of like, oh, look, there's, people are poor and no one's white over there. And then 2 blocks later, like everyone's white, everyone's rich. They've done a really good job of kind of taking that message and turning it into systemic racism, right?
Yes.
So I was wondering if you thought there was anything conservatives could do as far as messaging to kind of still address the problem, but do it in a conservative way where like,
sure. So I think so Jordan, I think that there's a category error that has been actively promulgated by the media and by the political left. And you mentioned the category error here. And that is, there are 2 cross-cutting distinctions that we've mentioned in this conversation already. The cross-cutting distinction between poor and rich, and the cross-cutting distinction between black and white. One of these is not the cause, right? So what the left has done is they've said that the distinctions are essentially the same. They've conflated the 2. Poor equals black, rich equals white, right? This is something that Joe Biden himself has said. Right? Joe Biden gaffed a couple months ago, and he said, there's a difference between being rich and being black, right? Which is an incredible statement. There are lots of rich black people in America, and there are lots of poor white people in America.
Oh, yeah.
Because black people in the United States are disproportionately poorer than white people in the United States, although Asian people in the United States are disproportionately richer than either one of those groups, by the way, because people conflate the cross-cutting distinctions because they basically argue that poor equals black and rich equals white. First of all, that's kind of racist because it ain't true. But 2, it's actually, it's ignoring the real problem, which is how do we get poor people to be richer? Right? The question is not, did those rich people steal the money from the poor people? Because they didn't. The question is, and the question isn't, are there legal structures in place that keep the poor people poor? Because there aren't. The real question is, and the question isn't even what happened in history to make certain areas lower income versus certain areas higher income. The question is, what can we do today to make poor people richer? And this is why you've seen, it's really fascinating. You've seen a gap open up, or at least there was a gap until very recently, between sort of the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, the sort of socialist wing of the Democratic Party, and the racial justice warrior wing of the Democratic Party. Because Bernie sounds kind of more like a Republican when he suggests that what we're really talking about is the distinction between rich and poor. Right? His solutions are wrong, but he says what we're really talking about is a class issue here. And then there are Democrats who say it's not really a class issue, it's a race issue. But Bernie is right that it's more of a class issue, right? It is more about like poor versus rich. And then the question becomes, what decisions can we incentivize in people's lives so that poor areas become richer? What can we do to gentrify those areas? And one of the things that you will see from members of the political left is an objection to many of the steps that need to be taken in order to make it easier for poor people to become rich. So this is what you see with the insane stuff from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where they say that punctuality, cause and effect, that the scientific method, these are white people things. No, those are ways that you get successful, right? Being a diligent person is how you become successful in the United States, regardless of your race. It's why when you see the left saying we need to get rid of the police, you think to yourself, okay, that is making it worse for poor people, regardless of race. It's making it significant, which is why, by the way, 81% of black Americans say they want at least the same number of police in their neighborhoods or more police in their neighborhoods. I think that human beings have an innate tendency to make distinctions based on visible differences, like differences between race. But the actual visible differences that should matter are the differences between, for example, rich and poor. How many cops are on the streets? What are the housing conditions like? How do we get more businesses into these neighborhoods? What are the crime rates like? Right? If you want to make it so that poorer areas in Hartford are more like richer areas, then how do you make it so that poorer areas are more like richer areas, rather than assuming that the white people are keeping the black people down, or that some sort of de facto segregation is the actual rationale here, instead of individual decision-making that can actually be cured? You can't really cure the nature of human sin. What you can do is incentivize people to make good decisions and make it easier for them to make good decisions by vitiating the obstacles to cause and effect. What crime does, for example, is it vitiates. What crime does is it creates an obstacle to cause and effect, right? You're working hard, you're doing your best, and you can't get any customers to come in your store because they're afraid they're going to get robbed, right? You're doing what you can, and the system has not provided protection for your property. So what do we need to do? We need to provide protection for your property so that cause and effect are now effectuated.
So is there a message Republicans should be pushing? Because a lot of it's just like, Democrats are wrong, but I feel like Democrats are winning the messaging on this.
Well, I think Democrats are winning the messaging, mainly because most Americans see disproportionate differences between groups, and they immediately assume that that is due to inequity, that it is due to some sort of discrimination. So the conflation between disparity and discrimination is a very easy one. It's an easy mental trick to play. But the truth is that there are disparities between every group, right? As I mentioned earlier, Asian Americans have a much higher household income than white Americans. That doesn't mean that Asian Americans are discriminating against white Americans or that the system is built to benefit Asian Americans. It means that there are many areas of the United States where people individually need to make better decisions, where governments need to make better decisions about how to incentivize good decision making and prevent crime. And yes, put criminals in jail, and that would be a good thing. The same leftists who are claiming that we need better opportunities in poor minority neighborhoods are opposing gentrification. Gentrification is bringing more money into those communities. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, cool.
Jordan, really appreciate the call. And thanks for the missionary work. That's obviously a very, very good thing. Steve in Chicago, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Steve.
Hey, Ben. Several years ago, you were doing a live show in Seattle with Black Lives Matter activists. It's a popular YouTube clip. When asked about whether racism is a driving factor in income inequality, you responded, because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. Some of your fellow panelists initially started laughing, but you continued with your response and they had no answer. So I wanted to ask you, could you define culture? What elements of culture in the Black community are driving income inequality? And is it possible to discuss culture honestly without being branded a racist, since race and culture are so deeply interrelated?
So first of all, I don't think that race and culture have to be interrelated, nor should they be. I mean, I wouldn't say that it is quote unquote Black culture to not value education. There are plenty of Black Americans who value education extraordinarily highly. I think that there are certain pathologies that exist in poor communities, Black or white, that are common across those communities. Now, they may not exist in the same proportions in those communities, but that has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture, right? There are areas of white Appalachia where education is not valued particularly highly. J.D. Vance talks about this in Hillbilly Elegy. The pathologies of poverty that exist cross-racially are the same. And then it's just a question of how often they exist in particular communities, regardless of race. So pathologies of poverty include not valuing education enough, such that your kids are not spending a lot of time on homework, or not having fathers in the home, such that you have two parents who are available to help read with your kids. Pathologies of poverty include high crime, include, again, lack of fathers in the home means that very often young men tend to congregate in gangs, right? Those are pathologies of poverty, right? All of those pathologies are not unique to the Black community. They may exist disproportionately in particular Black communities, but that doesn't mean that that's because of the race. The bottom line is that the recipe for success is the same for everyone in the United States. You make responsible decisions. You don't have babies out of wedlock. You finish high school. If you go to college, try to major in something where you're actually going to make money on the other end. Like, for example, you'll see people cite statistics that Black college graduates don't earn as much as white college graduates. Well, that doesn't adjust for major. If you major in a soft study, a liberal arts study, you're not going to make as much money as if you major in STEM, which is why white college graduates earn less than Asian American college graduates, for example. Right? They're just decisions. And so what I said in that clip, and it's right, obviously, which is why you see the people who I'm talking to, one is a member of the local NAACP, one's a member of the Seattle Stranger, right? You see these people go from laughing to being kind of chastened a little bit in the clip. It is not arguable that pathologies of poverty like single motherhood have nothing to do with race. When the single motherhood rate in the Black community went from 20% in 1960 to well over 70% today, that is going to have some significant downstream effect. When the high school dropout rate differential between high school Black students and high school white students is significant, that's going to have significant downstream effect. What does that have to do with race? The answer is it doesn't have anything to do with race. Okay, so I think the way to discuss it is to point out over and over and over again that this is not a racial distinction. This is a distinction between decisions that individuals make and can make. And our job in terms of public policy is to incentivize people to make the right decisions, not to incentivize them to make the wrong decisions by, for example, compensating them for making the wrong decisions, which is what welfare policy did in the 1960s and helped exacerbate the problems of single motherhood in Black communities, by the way, as well as white communities. The single motherhood rate in the white community was 5% in 1960. Today, it's well in excess of 40%.
Well, Ben, thank you for that. I mean, I think the thing that is a little frustrating when I hear Democrats talking is that they refuse to address the culture issue whatsoever. They immediately want to go to social programs and not discuss culture. And I just think culture is such an important element that does drive income inequality. I'm just surprised they won't do it.
I mean, all we mean by culture, when we say culture, is just decisions made by people. And when we say culture, it means like a disproportionate number of bad decisions or good decisions made by a particular group of people. And again, that is not, that's why I'm not going to say it's quote unquote black culture on education, that black people don't care about education. That's not true. It depends on which areas you're talking about. So again, that has nothing to do with race. And saying that things have nothing to do with race is a pretty good way of explaining that things have nothing to do with race. It's hard to be branded a racist when you keep saying over and over things have nothing to do with race that don't have to do with race. Really appreciate the call. Alrighty, in just a second, we'll take more of your calls at 855-236-3228.